Welcome to the Tier 1 Podcast, bringing you interviews with the brightest minds in the shooting industry. Get unique insights to help you shoot better, survive longer, and outperform your competition. Brought to you by Tier 1, the world's best shooting accessories.
Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of the Tier 1 Podcast. Today we are very lucky to have Rex Tibor giving us an hour of his time in a really cool in-depth interview covering how to master the art of long-range riflemanship, long-range shooting. We cover quite a lot of topics in this interview, so stay through to the end because it really is packed with interesting info. We go over topics like how Rex got started, how he developed a feel for the rifle and how you could potentially do the same. Does practice on the range help or possibly actually hinder your development as a shooter? Who makes a good shooter? Is it natural or is it trained? He talks about the Y chromosome factor, which is an interesting thing I think we've all suffered from at some point. And then we dive into some more in-depth technical analysis of the science of shooting and the science of ballistics, which Rex has a huge wealth of knowledge on. And so there's some really great information there. Certainly things you could apply to your own shooting. And we finish up with some discussion around learning from old artillery manuals and how much forgotten ballistic knowledge there is out there if you just go searching for it. Rex runs a series of courses in the US. If you want to check those out, I highly recommend you do. Have a look at rexdefense.com. You can also find him on his YouTube channel, Tiborosaurus Rex. Just go to YouTube and search for Rex Reviews and you'll find him that way. He's got an Instagram as well. He's very active on all of those platforms. We want to thank Rex for taking the time out to do this interview. Really appreciate it. He's a great guy. He's got some incredible knowledge. And we really appreciate him sharing it. So that's it for me. Thanks for joining and enjoy the interview with Rex Tibor.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. It's cool to visit with you again. I always like visiting with you guys, and also got some pretty slick equipment there. I've been trying the Tier 1 bipods, Tier 1 USA bipods for a while.
Fantastic.
And they're built real nice. So we're still running those through the courses and stuff like that. But I mean, my shooting history goes way back. As far as I can remember, I probably was shooting rifles before I was riding bicycles. I think I was 4 when I started with centerfire rifles.
Right.
And so it goes way back. My father, the culture where I'm from up here, I'm from the northern central United States in a state called North Dakota, is bordering Canada, kind of right in the middle of the border there. And it's very cold up here, but it's very kind of old school Western Rough Rider country, they call it, where Teddy Roosevelt spent a lot of his time. And so culturally, it's kind of like the Old West. Yeah. And so my father had us, when we were little kids, going fishing down on the beach. And if the fish weren't biting, we would run and shoot sticks out of the mud with .45 revolvers and, shoot at the riverbank or whatever it was. And so just kind of grew up in it my whole life, I guess. So it was an organic experience for me. It was something that I didn't realize wasn't like all over the world until later. And when I did some traveling and stuff, I got around a little more, and I discerned that there was actually a market for it. And so here I am. Now we're doing training and we're doing reviews of long-range equipment. And up here where I'm from, too, North Dakota, everything's very, very far away because it's quite flat and desolate. So if you want to shoot something, in the case of hunting, we did a lot of varmint hunting growing up as little kids and teenagers and middle schoolers and all that, shooting at various kind of, varmints and also like large game deer. But it was not uncommon for stuff to be, several hundred yards away to start with.
Sure. And
so it's just something that the guy kind of grew up doing, like anything else. But yeah, I mean, so when I started the YouTube channel, I was going to university at that time after I'd been doing other lines of work for a few years. And when I got back home, I went to university, and I wanted to share some of my music videos because I'm a musician as well. I grew up in a family of musicians.
Sure.
And so I thought I'd share that and some other studies. I'm into history and culture and just all kinds of interesting stuff. And so I forget who it was, a brother or a cousin or somebody said, "Hey man, you should put some of this stuff on YouTube. You know, you're pretty creative." And so I put that on there, and that's where it started. And I was going with that, and you know, it's a little tiny channel, you know, maybe a few subscribers here and there.
And how long
and then
ago
I
was
posted a video. Oh man, I think that was the first computer I owned was actually 2009, I think, like 2009. I evaded the computer and the cell phone as long as humanly possible.
It gets you in the end.
Yeah, it's like George Orwell's 1984 chasing
Right.
you down. You know, I was like, no, I'm good. I'm just going to live up in the mountains. How about that?
Great.
But
yeah.
when you get into the real world and you get into education, especially, you have to sign up for your classes online. So
Sure.
I ended up getting my first laptop, and then I think it was 2009. And then I think I posted my first shooting video. I don't remember when it was. And I found that, wow, that's very, very popular.
Yeah.
And then I started doing some of the long range stuff.
Yeah.
And like with my 338 Lapua Magnums and stuff like that, and guys went nuts.
Yeah.
And I found myself answering so many questions, you know, online just by typing in the commentaries or what do they call that, private message, right?
Yeah, sure.
It was like I could have wrote like 6 books by now with all those questions. So I thought, man, it would just be easiest, and I actually had some formal requests to do some formal online instruction from folks that wanted to understand the procedure. And so I thought, well, I'll do a tutorial series. And so I did what I originally called the Long Range Precision Rifle Shooting Tutorial or something like that.
Right.
The title was so long, I ended up making it a little shorter. I just called it Sniper 101, which kind of gets the point across.
Right.
And so we put those up there, and ended up being 101 videos. And yeah, we covered a lot of stuff. There's still so much more to cover. But that turned out to be quite a series.
That is a very in-depth series. Yeah, I mean, I started plowing through that in preparation for the call, and I mean, I don't know if there is anyone out there who's put that much detail or that much content out there for free as you have. So I think
not for free. There's a lot of really good sources of information out there. I mean, everything I learned from other people.
Sure.
Most of it, you know, and a lot of it by stumbling over my own shoelaces, of course, too.
Sure.
But yeah, in terms of for free, the project was a hobby to begin with, and then it became kind of a public service.
Yeah.
And then it became a business later.
Sure.
And the business part of it, I never intended to go into business with it until I got cornered by one of my friends in the industry, who does training commercially. Right. And he says, why are you not training for money?
Sure.
You know, you know, with commercial training. And because I've done other things, but I thought, well, I never thought of that. And so he explained how it works, and we stuck our foot in the water, and it wasn't that bad.
And the rest is history.
Yes, sir.
Just going back, you mentioned you went to university, and I was reading in your bio that you said that it was around that time that you were introduced to the scientific method, and that is that underpins kind of all of your approach now to shooting and to long range shooting and improving people's long range shooting. Is that still the case? And can you sort of tell us a bit about how you use that?
Yeah, I mean, I was more formally instructed in the scientific method when I did go to university. I'm educated in classical sciences. I got 3 different degrees in science. Wow. But and I worked as an engineer in various fields. Right. After that, and actually before that as well, I worked for a university when I was actually in grade school. My mother worked at the university, and I worked as a tech, helping the doctors carry out their experiments and stuff like that. And so that was pretty interesting. Yep. And my father was always he was a very, very good teacher, and I was always very inquisitive, and he always did a very good job explaining to me, like, okay, here's the procedure, here's the logical way of looking at something, here's the process of elimination, here's the best way to figure out the answer to something.
Sure.
And so when I look at something, I back away from the picture, I try to look at the big picture, find out what the priorities are, eliminate things, you know, based on the scientific method, and go through it that way. So everything that I look at, I try to put through the scientific method if it's a question. If it's not a question, but it's a determined fact, then you have to look at the overall situation, because long-range shooting is a complex art.
Right.
When it comes out, you know, when you see someone doing it, there's a lot of procedures, a lot of steps to it.
Yes.
And so some of it you have to use scientific method to determine, like, is this true or is this not true, or how true is it, or how much does it affect a certain thing.
Right.
But once you know what it is, then you have to back up. And the hardest part is to have the intuition and field experience to understand the prioritization of something. For example, there's a lot of things in shooting like aerodynamic jump or Coriolis drift, that a lot of people nerd out on, if that's the right term. I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
And it's very interesting, and people argue about it all day long, and they'll spend, 9,000 calories trying to figure out exactly how that subtlety works.
Yeah.
But they don't realize that they could have put their efforts on this other thing. So prioritization of the major points in the craft, I think, is the part that actually puts the rubber to the road, transfers the horsepower into the actual acceleration of the vehicle.
For sure.
Otherwise, you're just burning your tires.
For sure, yeah, absolutely. It's about, sensible application of your energy, to get the result that you're aiming for.
Yep.
Do you find that the thing that people should focus on is different for everyone, or is different by setup, or are there some just absolute hard and fast foundations that everybody should focus on?
Well, there is a universal skeleton to the art of riflemanship, right? Which is marksmanship.
Sure.
So marksmanship would be the foundation. You have to be able to handle whatever equipment it is that you're handling properly, right? And there's just a couple base fundamentals. We talk about that when we do our training, and it's also in the tutorial series. And you can get into infinite detail on that if you want to sharpen it.
Sure.
But you have to have your marksmanship down. Your equipment has to be sound. Like a lot of people really get excited about new cartridges, new barrels, new twist rates, new technology here, new parts there. And that's cool, and it's neat to watch the advancement of the technology. But all in all, you need sound equipment, something that is not broke, like any rifle that's not broke, that's not rusted out, something that'll put them in there that functions. And then the third thing that you have to have as your skeleton is a logical system that's organized to prioritize what your procedure is when you're talking about long range, because there is a certain amount of external ballistic compensation you have to do. So you have to know what that is. And how to best apply that, and the procedure for doing that, determine your range and all that stuff. You have to have some kind of system that's viable in the field. So that's the skeleton of long-range shooting when you're talking about that you can't really deviate from that part. That's the part that's universal. Now, within that, it depends on the application so much, exactly what you're willing or wanting to do with it. If you're hunting or, potential military or tactical applications, that's a field application that puts a whole different set of pressures on that craft than you would have if you were just doing maybe a more static competition, F-class style shooting, target bench rest shooting, even varmint shooting where you're shooting static. There's a lot of prairie dog hunting. I don't know if you've ever heard of that over there.
For sure.
But out west in the United States, it's a big thing. And so, if you're doing stuff like that, or if you're shooting at paper, or if you're shooting for group sizes, that's a whole different set of pressures, and you might have a different way of looking at the world through those lenses. So then it's just a matter of asking, like, hey, what are you into? Now, most of my training and my background, and I always try to disclose this at my training, and even on the reviews, is I come from a field background. I grew up in the field. My father, it was always, I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a bipod, or that you could rest the rifle on something until I was like, 10 years old.
Right. Yeah.
And so I had like 5 or 6 years of shooting offhand, and learning how to do that in that one way. And then, kneeling, you can get a little more steady, or laying down. Holy smokes, that's a huge advantage. So there's a lot of other
I don't think a lot of people learn to shoot like that. I'd be surprised. I know we can't.
Well, sure, and that's the nature of static shooting ranges. I mean, they have to control it in a safe fashion, especially when there's higher populations. To tell the truth, where I grew up, there was not like any shooting ranges per se.
Right.
Not like there is in the cities, or on a military range, or a police range, or a government range, or whatever. The whole area surrounding my house was a shooting range.
Yes.
I mean, he's literally just go outside the house and don't point at any, off buildings. Don't point at a road if there's cars on it,
Yep.
And so it's very, very, very rural up here. And up in where I'm from, you can shoot on any public land with no problem. So there was there was no need for a shooting range.
Sure.
So that whole idea of having to sit at a bench and be static, I didn't even know that existed until much later.
Yeah. Well, that's different. It's unorthodox. But I think, did you think that gave you an advantage when you did come to introducing the bags and the bipods? Did you have a better feel for the gun?
Absolutely. So like if you understand the fundamentals of shooting, like standing, kneeling, sitting, and prone, just unsupported, if you can master the fundamentals of marksmanship doing it like that.
Yeah.
And then when I first had my first bipod, for example, or used one of my cousins had a bipod, I think, I remember, and I thought, holy smokes, this is the ticket.
It's like cheating, right?
It was amazing.
Yeah.
It's just something so stupid and simple that's ubiquitous nowadays, right?
Sure.
But growing up out in the field in the middle of nowhere, yes, it adds a huge amount of advantage to it's all geometry and positioning. And there's such when you talk about the fundamentals of marksmanship, one of them is having a natural point of aim.
Yes.
Part of that is steady position, a comfortable position.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to get into that if you have artificial support.
Yeah.
You basically lay the gun on the ground, adjust it with the toe support bag, and it is solid.
Sure.
And that takes the worst part of any position is the shooter sitting behind the rifle.
Sure.
Because that's a wiggly biological animal that's got one day it feels good, the next day it doesn't. One day it's wearing a fluffy coat, the next day it's wearing a T-shirt.
Sure.
Those things all make difference. You maybe drink a cup of coffee one day, the other day you didn't. So
Sure.
That's the part that's changing the most. And if you can eliminate that by using artificial support, that makes it a lot easier to be more consistent. And consistency is really the key in getting good precision.
So, segueing from that into, I think that neatly rolls onto what you do in your courses with Rex Defense. You teach. I mean, I've obviously not attended a course, but I've seen the videos you posted on Instagram. There's some really cool stuff that you do there, and you've got. If I just quickly try and run through them, you've got the RX 100, 1000, and 3000, which is your long range course. You've got the DMR course.
That designated marksman rifle course, yep.
Yeah, and then there's the hard target interdiction course, which looks like a lot of fun. That's
yep. That's for big bores, for shooting at hard targets. For those of you that know what that might be, yep.
Sure, and then the combat command,
like on Terminator 2, Judgment Day, that movie.
Yeah, great.
Kind of like on that movie.
Yeah. Now, any chance to live out a Terminator fantasy?
Or Maximum Overdrive. You ever see that one?
I didn't. I'll write it down. I'm going to check that out.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic. That's a Stephen King. That's where all the cars and all the machines go crazy because of some kind of comet. Yep. It's a really cheesy B-roll kind of, or B movie.
For sure.
And, that's one that you watch when you're a kid, and it's pretty fun, from the 80s. Classic 80s scary movie from Stephen King.
You can't beat 80s films. They were shameless.
It's basically a bunch of semi-trucks driving around a gas station, and they're trying to figure out how to get past them.
Right.
And they're unmanned. They're just they're possessed by whatever it is.
Okay.
So
and that's
where that comes in handy. Hard target interdiction. That's a hard target. You got to stop a semi-truck from getting you.
Sure, and you got to put a round through the engine block or something to kill it.
Well, in law enforcement roles, that's a legitimate thing.
For sure.
There are vehicles that attack people nowadays, so
yes,
that's kind of the perspective we're coming at it from.
Yeah, well,
is hard targets are something you have to stop sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you cover a real range of interesting stuff, and on the, I think it's in the long range, but you correct me if I'm wrong. You get the guys and girls to shoot from different positions, so from prone, from seated, and not always. There's a lot of variation in the firing positions, and you get them.
Sure.
You seem to be getting them out of their comfort zone a lot of the time. Is there?
Yeah, no, it depends on which class they're taking. The RX 1000 and 3000. When you're shooting extremely far.
Yeah.
There's only a couple positions that are steady enough for you to even be able to carry that out.
Right. Sure.
So that's mostly prone type shooting from artificial support. But for a lot of the other shooting, the RX 100 or the designated marksman course, which is more of a moving course. You're like moving around. Basically, any field application, it's very rare that you're going to find a shooting bench sitting out there when you need to shoot something.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Absolutely.
you have to learn how to shoot offhand or kneel
Sure.
or sit. And so, yeah, we go through all the different basic positions. That depends on body type. That depends on, there's a lot of other things. For example, I got sick a couple of years ago, and my health was taken off the table. And before that, I always used to be kind of an in-shape guy. And so I was very dogmatic before I understood that there's different capabilities just within the human body, right? And when you get arthritic, like in the neck, like I've gotten so much recoil over the years that the right side of my neck is very arthritic.
Really?
So it limits the movement in your cervical vertebrae, right?
Right.
And or for example, like you get heavier. Like I gained a lot of weight since I had cancer a couple years ago, and steroid treatment and chemotherapy and all this stuff.
Right.
And so, after being a big guy versus a small guy, I'm like, wow, this is a whole different ballgame because the ergonomics of me laying behind that rifle are totally different now.
Yeah.
And so things that I used to think I could be dogmatic on, I kind of loosened up on now that I've been kind of all over the map.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm more empathetic towards other deals because, it depends on the situation is usually the answer.
You don't get that. Obviously, in the style of shooting we have in the UK, and I know this is going out to the US as well, so, it's you guys will understand it better than us. But we have a lot of static bench shooting. And, but if you're deer stalking, there's more opportunities to find an interesting firing position.
And I think it's good to be well-rounded. There's a huge value to the static shooting.
Yeah.
That's where you exercise. It's like weightlifting, right? You don't just do your legs all the time. You do your legs one day, and then you do your back, and then you do your arms, and then you do your chest, and then you run. If you want to be well-rounded in your fitness. And bench rest shooting and static shooting is very good for learning the subtleties and the idiosyncrasies of getting the mechanics of the rifle perfect, getting the ammunition perfect, like F-class type shooting or any of the competitive like bench rest type shooting is really good for pushing the edge on the equipment. That's where most of your technological advancement comes, is because you will actually see it. The noise in the system is usually the shooter being wiggly. And if you can remove the noise out of the system completely by having a bench rest competition, that's where you're going to start to see the downfalls of the technology. And now the technology is, now you have a whole new race. Yeah. And so now that's where the evolution on the tech side comes from, is in those crafts. So I find it very valuable. And I do a lot of my shooting in that way as well, because like I said, for long range, typically you're going to try to find the ideal position. And if you could, that would be laying prone or in a very, very steady position that is static.
Yes. When people come on your courses, so, I guess they're all different, but when they come on your courses, do you generally ask them to go do a bunch of range shooting so they're well acquainted with their setup so that you can work from that foundation? Or do you like to start from scratch with people and kind of build them up?
That's a great question. Really, in all honesty, if you look at, there's a big difference between training and practicing. Training is learning how to practice. A lot of people think they're training ahead of time, but they're actually reinforcing maybe habits that are not helping them. Yeah. Sometimes they might be, if they have guidance, or if they just accidentally land on the right way to do it, or if they, struggle with it long enough, eventually you will find that way that works, right? Yeah. You can eventually find that out.
Sure.
But it's easier to work with folks if they come kind of fresh, because then you can get the ergonomics corrected. And it's hard to unlearn things that you learned that are not not correct. Being a guitar player, I remember learning some Jimi Hendrix songs when I was in 7th grade. Like I think I was playing Little Wing and Purple Haze or something like this, right?
Yeah,
and I got corrected by right. And so I was playing the song the way I heard it because I was playing it by ear, and it was close, but it wasn't exactly right. And so one of my cousins said, "No, you're hitting the wrong note, man." Yeah. And so it took me like 10 or 20 times more energy to unlearn and relearn, what I had learned wrong. Yeah. If I would have just not known it, and then he would have showed it to me, it would have been a lot easier. And that's the way the brain works. When you learn something, there's a wrinkle in the brain that is formed. That's the physiology of it, and then that's hard to then the more you do it, the more deep that wrinkle gets, and that neurological pathway gets carved in there deeper and deeper, right? And so, like, if you're trying to unlearn it, it doesn't want to go. It wants to go down that path of least resistance.
Sure.
And so it's absolutely easier to start with folks kind of from square one if they're, but we work with guys who have been shooting their whole lives too.
Sure.
We work with guys that are, very successful instructors, champions of competition, military folk, whoever. We train with all kinds of tier 1 guys.
Yeah.
And they do great, and there's a lot of different ways to do it right. And so what we do is we don't try to correct anybody unless we see that there's a correction needed. And that's one of the things with dogmatic instruction is you'll find that sometimes, like I said earlier, we like to superimpose our own experience onto other people.
Yes.
And so, like, I will look at them, and that's not the way I would do it, so I might be tempted back when I was younger to go and try to correct them. Yeah. Even though they were shooting just fine in that position.
Sure.
I didn't have the wisdom or the experience at that time to realize, okay, what are they doing? What's the mechanical objectives? What are the actual things that have to be accomplished?
Sure.
Are they just walking a different way around the barn? And if they can do it better that way, then it works fine.
Sure. Do you find that there is a common problem or common set of problems that run through, or maybe not problems, but
challenges or difficulties, or
right, exactly. That people are, when they come on your course, they generally all do X, or they all do Y or something like that.
Sure. Well, we have a variety of different courses. We usually start with a seminar, is how we've been doing it for the last 3 years, which is a very, very heavy classroom endeavor. Everyone comes, we talk. Okay. They try to get their equipment figured out. I think sometimes there's an overemphasis on different cartridges or different, barrel twist rates or things like that.
Sure, the forums are full of that.
Will make a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of like my wife actually plays roller derby. You ever see what roller derby is? Where them gals get on roller skates and beat the heck out of each other?
Yeah, it looks rough.
I was actually... Where are you guys at in England there?
We're down in... actually, the Tier 1 factory is in Yorkshire. So it's in the northeast of England, near the border.
Sure.
Yeah, not too far from Scotland.
I forget which train station it is. I think it's the big one in the middle of London there. There's a skate shop that's world famous for roller derby stuff.
Oh, right.
But they got quite a selection in there.
Oh, well, I'll check it out. Okay.
But I remember, and I also used to coach some of it as well, which was I found pretty entertaining. But sometimes some of them chicks were really, really good on their skates.
Sure.
But the reason they weren't good on their skates is because they had the best wheel bearings or something like that. Yeah. It was because they knew how to skate. Yeah. Now, after a certain point, like it is with guitars, I remember I had the same $60, I think it was made in Korea, K guitar, K-A-Y guitar, real cheapy. Sure. And I used that for like 20 years before I upgraded because I found out, after you master something, then you're like, okay, now you notice the subtle differences in how much nicer it is to upgrade, right?
Sure.
And so that's one of the things that people get when they're brand new into it. That there's an overemphasis on like subtleties of like different cartridge advantages. There's no magic caliber or cartridge or bullet that'll make you just hit at a mile.
No,
it's all about the shooter. Yeah. Now those advantages can help you, but there's like they're like picking out one little pin out of a haystack, and they're ignoring this mountain of stuff next to them that they need to worry about.
Yeah,
and so that's a very common deal that happens, I think. It's just the an overemphasis on some of those details before they get the basics squared away. Another very common one, probably in terms of marksmanship, would be maybe follow through. Is very hard to train into folks that haven't been doing it their whole life.
Right.
That was hard actually for me to relearn.
Right.
I grew up in a different style of shooting, where I think where a lot of it comes from is really poor optics or open sights. So when you shoot and there's a recoil and there's an explosion right in front of your face, right?
Yeah.
You flinch. Or you want to see what happens. You want feedback from the target. You want to see what happens.
Yeah.
So typically, like as a kid, you have a really, really poor 3/4-inch scope tube on some BB gun scope that's on your rifle or whatever, right?
Sure.
And you shoot, and then you got to look over the top of the rifle to see what actually happened because you can't see through the scope.
Sure.
You got to see. You pop your head up. and then you take your finger off the trigger. And that's something that's hard to train out of people when you put it behind a precision rifle that's geared to be, you stay glued to that rifle idealistically. You're a lot faster getting back on target if you just stay glued to that rifle. So the rifle recoils, you don't move, you're like an oak tree. Well, you know, the rifle will push you a little bit, but you don't move, you don't blink, you don't do anything. You just lay there and you observe your bullet fly into the target. Yeah. Hopefully. Yeah. Or next to the target.
If you've done it right.
You reassess.
If you've taken the course.
Make a quick correction and shoot.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that that would be a common issue. I mean, it's very easy to get lost in the gear because you buy new gear, you feel like you've solved the problem, and it's not so easy to fix a problem with yourself. You know,
right. Well, I tell people at the class, you could take Jimi Hendrix's guitar, you know, the Stratocaster or whatever, right?
Yes.
Or Stevie Ray Vaughan or any musician.
Yes.
Or, you know, pick anybody. Or hand a basketball, you know, Michael Jordan's basketball or whoever.
Yeah.
To some random person on the street. Are they going to be a master basketball player just because they have Michael Jordan basketball?
No.
Or because they have, are they going to be able to just whip out a Jimi Hendrix song immediately, perfectly, with perfect execution just because they have the guitar?
No.
It's not about that. No, the guitar, it needs to be sound and it needs to be a good guitar, you know, but you have to learn how to play the thing. So that's the main thing.
So I won't dive into gear too much, but is there like a good setup that you would recommend for people if they're just beginning and they want to get into long range and they want, what would you recommend?
Well, it depends on exactly what kind of long range shooting you're looking to do, but I think that there's one of the very popular choices nowadays has been the 6.5 Creedmoor.
Yes.
When I originally did my tutorial series online, it was brand new. It had not reached critical mass yet, but that's very common now. It's kind of become the long-range caliber that's commercially available, so there's a lot of ammunition. You don't have to get into reloading. You can buy over-the-counter ammunition. It's reasonably priced. The recoil is low. If you put it in any decent rifle, I think that like a Tikka makes a good rifle, the Tikka T3.
Sure,
you can get a Savage, Model 12, you know, the target rifles or the Model 10s. They all shoot very well.
Sure.
I was actually just shooting a Mossberg, which is the cheap kind of version of a Savage that's only like $200 or $300 US over here, which is pretty cheap.
Yeah.
And it shoots almost as good as those fancy ones.
Really?
So, yeah. So I think that if you get a good sound rifle, I like Tikka, I like Savage for over-the-counter options. I think something in a 6.5 millimeter or even maybe a 243 Winchester is a good place to start because they're plenty good enough to get you way past 1,000 yards with no problem, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to find a range in most places in the world that shoot farther than that.
Sure.
Like Bisley, does that go out to, beyond 1,000? I'm trying to remember how far they go there.
Yeah, I know it's a very big range. I'd have to check. I've not shot there myself, but yeah, it is.
Sure.
It's a famous
yeah, so I think that a 6.5 Creedmoor does it very well. For target shooting, stuff like that, no problem.
Sure.
If you need energy on target, you know, because you're shooting at animate targets or whatever that might be, or hunting or something like that, or if you need to shoot at extreme long range, like beyond a mile, then you're going to need a Magnum. Okay. Now you're in a whole different ball game. Now you need something at least like a 330 at Lapua Magnum.
Sure.
And there's a lot of I like Sako. The TRG 42 is a great over-the-counter option. I would really like Steyr. Actually makes, if you have a little more money to spend, makes a great product. Rangemaster Precision Arms there in England has great products. Accuracy International, very good.
Yes.
Those are very, very, very heavy-duty, rugged weapons, and they do a great job as well. So, I mean, it's they're all good if you know how to run them.
Sure, and but I guess just bear in mind that if you're not Jimi Hendrix, right, you don't need Jimi Hendrix's guitar. For sure.
Or vice versa, you could hand Jimi Hendrix a cheap guitar and he could make it sound beautiful, probably, if you let him tune it up, right?
Of course, that it would sing. Yeah. Do you think it's a good metaphor, the guitar, because it is something you have to master to get beyond quite a clumsy, clunky sort of style of playing.
Sure.
And of course, there are people who are super talented, and I'm sure Jimi Hendrix was. But for most people, it comes down to hours. You know, how many hours did you spend playing that guitar? You know, practicing your chords. Is it the same you find with the rifle? Is it the same sort of process? Is it about hours behind the gun?
That's a very, very intelligent question. Let me think about that for a second. I would say there is a certain component of it that is natural ability. Some people have good fine motor control skills, right?
Yeah.
Women and actually do a really good job with that.
Right.
They're good natural long-range marksmen because they have very, very subtle and fine control over their fine motor skills. They also have the hippocampus in the brain, links the left and right side of the brain more uniformly because they're focused on a more peripheral attention, whereas a man's brain zooms in more on one particular topic. So in long-range shooting, there's so much stuff going on. You have to manage your breathing. You have to manage your marksmanship. You have to keep an eye on the wind. You have to remember your ballistics. You have to see what the target's doing. There's actually like managing this whole office. It's like if you have a computer, how much RAM is it taking up? There's all kinds of stuff going on in a long-range shot that's very dynamic and continuously changing, particularly the wind. So women actually do a very good job at it naturally. So there's a certain component that is natural aptitude. Time put in and number of rounds fired can either hurt you or help you.
Right.
If you're doing it wrong, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
If you're doing it right, or a way, there's not a wrong or a right, but if you're doing it a way that works good for you, then it gets better and better and better and better. If you're doing it a way that's even better than that, then it doesn't take as much time to practice, right?
Sure.
I have a course called Zero to Deadly. It's the RX 100 course.
Okay.
And we have shooters come that have never touched a rifle.
Really?
And actually, I had an experiment before we started the class. We had a Casey Day. She was doing the podcast that we were doing last year, and she had never shot a rifle in her entire life.
Right.
And I gave her a 5-minute lecture. She was laying down with a decent rifle, prone, with a toe support bag and a bipod.
Yeah.
And it was 6.5 Creedmoor. I think I had her dry fire 2 or 3 times. It's on video on YouTube.
Right.
On the Tibor Rex channel under Rex Reviews. You can look up the Zero to Deadly video.
Yeah,
and it just kind of, I kind of micromanage her.
Yeah.
Yeah. I walk her through every step. I look at her, her cheek pressure. I'm like, okay, you're not going to want to do that. You're going to want to get your head positioned this way. Okay, now watch your finger here, And if someone has been doing it their whole life, they can see if they're struggling with something, then it needs to be corrected. If they're doing something different, but it's going to work, then you just leave it alone.
Yeah.
And the objective is to get the rifle perfectly steady, exactly on target, right?
Yeah.
And then squeeze the trigger as to not disturb the lay of the rifle. Shooting is actually very simple in concept.
Yes.
You don't wiggle. You point the gun straight at the target, and then you don't wiggle when you shoot. And then it's the target.
It should go,
Now, you could go on for a million years talking about all the subtleties of that, but we got her squared away in, I think, 5 minutes, and her first 3 shots she ever fired in her life were under a minute of angle.
Wow. Fantastic.
So yeah, it's not a number of rounds because people can really, like I said before, you can have training scars as well.
Sure.
And you can reinforce bad habits that you have to unlearn later, and it's a lot more expensive that way.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I guess a lot of the barrier to that is pride. People don't want to admit that what they're doing is wrong.
Well, and that's another thing too. It's interesting. I call it the Y chromosome factor. And you know how you have your firing tables, like you have your ballistic information taped on your rifle.
Sure.
I always like to have one column off to the side as the Y chromosome factor. That's how much your cone of fire opens up when you have like 5 or more dudes looking over your shoulder as you're shooting. Or it's a constant. You could do it. One guy looking over your shoulder, you miss by this much. 2 guys, then you got to multiply it by this much.
Yeah.
So it's a constant that you multiply by. But the Y chromosome will totally hose a guy bad, like really bad. It's actually. People might argue with this, but I mean, there's been studies on, the art of warfare for a long time is kind of something that people study, right?
Of course.
There's a book called On Killing. Have you ever read that or heard of it?
I think I saw your one of your one of your guys who works in your courses, J.R. Mildot, Junior Mildot, is it? I think he recommended that book on Instagram. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. It talks about the psychology of warfare, the psychological leverage, all the things in history. It goes through all the field studies from World War II, like that Marshall did. It goes back to like Genghis Khan and Rome and Julius Caesar's notes and everything. It's very interesting.
Right.
But it's actually interesting that people are more scared, even in combat, of disappointing the guy next to them in their performance than they are at getting killed or hit with an arrow or starving to death, or getting hit by a grenade. Like they literally, by magnitudes, are more scared to fail in
Wow.
front of their friends than they are to die. And so that's the Y chromosome factor is no joke. I call it the slobber factor.
Right.
And so, like, what you'll see, you want to hear a funny story? Well, this is kind of horrible. Maybe I shouldn't tell it.
Well, tell it, and then if it's no good, we'll cut it.
Okay. So, when I grew up with me and my brother were shooting, and we would, where I'm from is very rural. You drive around and you take care of varmints. So you're driving in a pickup truck in the dark. And I think I had a Kalashnikov and he had an AR-15. Right. And we're driving with the pickup truck, and then these critters run out that are varmints, so you have to get rid of them, right?
Yeah.
And so you got to be quick, though, because they get out of the light.
Sure.
And so I remember on one, it was kind of a contest who could get the first shot off or who could make the hit first.
Yeah.
And there was this one, and you only have like a 1 or 2 second window max to get out of the truck and shoot and hit it.
Wow.
Or it's all you got to start over.
Yeah.
And so the truck is still actually rolling. It's an 83 Toyota pickup with no park brake. The park brake was off. And so I slam on the brakes to get the car or the pickup slow enough to where it's just rolling.
Yeah.
I barrel out with the Kalashnikov, and there it is just right in front of me. And he's getting out, and I see that he's about to do so. I intuitively point shoot, and I think I rip off 5 or 10 rounds real quick. And the critter disappeared. Yeah. This is like Looney Tunes, so forgive me if this is not cool. I don't know.
No, go ahead. Yeah,
I feel bad now. I don't do this anymore. When I watch animal movies, like the cartoons where they anthropomorphize all the characters, like Over the Hedge or Pixar movies, I cry when the animal is sad, and I'm a softie now in my older age. But when you're an adolescent, all adolescent mammals, especially predators, they start to really drool and slobber at the idea of chasing down that bunny rabbit, just like your puppy dog does, right?
Sure.
Or just like a cat does when it's chasing a bird.
Sure.
So when in adolescence,
it's a good character arc.
I ripped out these 5 or 10 rounds, and that critter disappeared. And he's looking at me. And then, you ever see the movie Tremors with the underground worms?
No, but I've seen clips of it. I haven't seen the whole movie, but I've seen clips. Yeah.
Well, I don't remember. There's a part where they blow up a worm. Right. There's these giant. It's another monster movie. I'm trying to make pop culture references. Come on, but there's anyways. All the parts start falling out of the sky about 10 seconds later, and I'm like, oh, there it is. I thought I missed. I didn't know what happened. There's so much smoke and dust.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, I guess that's a hit.
Yeah.
And my brother looks over at me, and he's like, dude, look at your shirt. And I look down, and my whole front of my shirt is just covered in drool. Well, I'm a teenager, right? I'm a young man.
Yeah.
And I'm like, holy Moses.
Yeah.
And so that's what I call the slobber factor. It's amazing how much tunnel vision you get when you're on the chase.
Yeah.
And that goes for if it's a competition, if it's kinetic applications, or if you're hunting, or if your buddy's watching you, or hey, hold my beer while I do this.
Yep.
You never mix beer with guns, by the way. But, if anything in life, that slobber factor, the adrenaline, pachypsychia, your brain, the speed of the mind changes. Your tunnel, all the adrenaline does so many things to your mind and to your muscles. And it's just weird how much it can affect you negatively
well, it's
if you don't keep it in check or understand its effects.
Yeah, it's a hunting instinct, of course. That's a really interesting point. Do you think that the control of those sort of things is the difference between pros, say tactical operators, actual special forces or military operators who have had that, who've been trained to handle those natural hormonal responses and therefore are colder in their application of the process?
Sure, a lot of that is breaking through the ice. There's another term for it which I will not use. I already told enough scary stories for the audience with that last one. But you got to break through the ice.
Yeah.
For example, I'll use a parallel again, which people might understand better. Public speaking, for example, is another fear that they say people fear speaking publicly more than they fear death. It's the biggest fear there is, right?
Sure, I've heard
or
that.
Letting someone they're scared someone's going to think they're dumb. It goes back to what we're talking about earlier with the studies that Marshall did on war, right? Yeah. And so if you look at that, that's interesting as well. Is like, forgive me, what was the question again? I was going on like 9 trails at once.
It was about, that's right, it was about You mentioned there's a natural sort of adrenaline
special
rush.
operators and training yourself out of it.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to
Handling
break
those...
through the ice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the first time you do a speech, you're terrified. The second time you do it, you're kind of terrified. Yeah. You kind of get through it, right?
Yeah.
I remember being a musician. My whole family's musicians, and they're highly critical studio musicians. They're very good.
Right.
And they do like recording on albums primarily, and then they play live all the time. But all the cousins, all the uncles, everybody, and it's a big family. They're all very critical. Right. And so I was always a little shy to come out. I wasn't scared to play the guitar in front of everybody because I could do that. But to sing was very personal. Of course. Because that's my voice coming out of my mouth. Like, and if I don't do it right, then it's more embarrassing. Sure. And so I was terrified. And I remember my father put me on the spot. And he's like, nope, because he would hear me singing by myself. And he's like, you're a good singer. You need to go out there and sing. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to. I'm too scared, Yeah. So he put me on the spot one day, and then I did it. And for the first 2 seconds, I was so stressed I was probably sweating blood. I mean, that's how high my blood pressure. I was probably like on the verge of a stroke as a kid. I think I was 15 years old when this happened. Yep. And there's 300 of my family in this giant city hall building all looking at me, like, okay, what's this kid going to do? And I'm like, oh, God, here we go. And so we started playing Painted Black by the Rolling Stones.
Great song.
And, the line comes out, and they're all kind of watching. Okay, so all right, you got the first lick down, and then the first verse comes in, and I sing it. And the second their eyes, like, oh, yeah, okay, then they're dancing. And I'm like, oh, once the dance begins, man, like, okay, you broke into the ice. Then after that, it's like there's that frictional resistance, and it's this way in physics, to initiate the movement of any object that has friction on it, right? Yeah. You have to break the frictional resistance, which is all those microscopic contours that you can't see even on a microscope, barely the dermal ridges on your hand. Sure. If you put your hand on the table and press down and then try to slide it across the table, it's stuck until it breaks loose. Once it breaks loose, it's fine. Yeah. That's the same thing with getting past the Y chromosome, and that's what your Tier 1 guys, professionals and military guys learn, is they kind of break through the ice. And once they break that frictional resistance, which is infinite things that nobody can quantify, nobody knows what it is psychologically that exactly is, but once you break that frictional resistance, then you can go ahead and move. And once you pick up speed, then it's not that big of a deal. And it's the same thing is true with hunting. I remember the first deer that I've ever taken, was the same way. You're just so nervous. And then after that, it's kind of like, oh, no big deal, Sure. Or playing guitar or that other stuff that we're talking about. Yeah. And so I that's my personal opinion. I'm sure it's different for everybody, but that's a pattern that I've observed.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. And I've got the cold sweats because the idea of singing in public is absolutely one of my top fears. Could we? I'd love to get some of your technical knowledge into this. Something that could you cover something that you teach maybe on one of your courses and just spend 5 or 10 minutes going into detail on that, and just treat me as if I've come to the course and know nothing, and it's about
No, that's fine. Actually, I learn more at my courses, I think, than my students do, because I like to listen more than I like to project. And that's probably the biggest speech I could ever give at the course, and that's the one that I hope resonates the best with everybody. And I tell them at the end of the course as well, is like, never decide that you have figured it out. Because the second you have made that decision, you cease to learn. Ego and pride are the two solid roadblocks that you'll never get past that will completely stop your venture further into any craft. Mm-hmm. Once you choose that you're the expert, then you're immediately done learning. Sure. So that's the one thing that the main thing I try to talk to people about is just keeping it open. People are so dogmatic, and there's so many different discussions, and it's interesting if you read all the technical, for example, if you talk about the mechanisms on the molecular scale that are responsible for actually the heating of the barrel, right? So you have a cartridge chambered into a rifle barrel. You have the firing pin hits the primer. The primer contains just a thin film of PETN, pentyrethorite tetranitrate, or a mercury fulminate of some kind of priming compound. That goes off. The incandescent particles go into the propellant, which is usually a nitrocellulose-based kind of powder that burns slowly, builds up pressure. the bullet starts to move out of the frictional resistance of the case. Then it touches the lands of the rifling. Then it starts to move down there. There's a lot of details of stuff that's going on. And like, if a guy follows that, you can go down a million rabbit trails. But there's the flame and the fire, you would imagine, is what could, heat the barrel, right?
Sure.
And so guys, and it's interesting because it's important in terms of metallurgy and engineering and how to build a rifle barrel that lasts longer, the hammer forging process and things like that. But what actually is heating up the barrel? Is it the friction? Is it the fire? Because that's a pretty hot flame, right, behind that bullet. And so there's guys that are engineers that will argue it's like, I forget what the percentages are. I remember having a conversation when I was doing Sniper 101 with, I think, a German physicist who was studying it or something. And we had a great back and forth on the internet. He was explaining to me the actual the mechanisms of how the barrels heat up according to his studies.
Right.
And he's like over 50% of the heating of the barrel is just from the flexing of the steel at a supersonic rate.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
So you have the deformation of the metal. If you bend a piece of metal back and forth, a lot of times it heats up, right?
Yes.
And so that's a huge part of it, is the shock wave of the explosion just resonating through the metal, the movement,
Yep.
And so then a part of it is from the friction, obviously, and then, of course, you have the flame behind it.
Sure.
But that's all – people will argue about that stuff. And the point is that, like, nobody really knows some of these details. And the second that someone gets entrenched into a position that you're not sure on, that's where the scientific method, that's where you get out the old scientific method, right?
Right. Which focuses
what do we
on
observe?
skepticism.
What do we actually measure? Yeah, it has to be, you have to have the other guy confirm it. If it's not confirmed, right? Like right now, there's a debate on bullet stability, right?
Okay.
On like, how is the Miller stability number like a thing that is something that can be trusted as a constant to stabilize that projectile?
Right.
Or is it more, in one of my hypotheses, and I'll admit it's just a hypothesis, it's not even a theory yet, or it's not a fact for sure,
Right.
is that a huge part of bullet stability has to do with the alignment of the actual bullet as it exits the case, the mouth of the case, and enters into the bore. So how is that chamber cut? That's a huge deal.
Yeah.
If it's asymmetrically swedged into there, the way I would imagine it would work,
Yeah.
and I don't have it's hard to get a camera rammed into there to look at it without special equipment, right? But if you have a bullet asymmetrically swedged into the bore, different from one rifle to the next, to the next, to the next, because of the manufacturing process of the rifles, right?
Yeah.
How they cut the chamber is like there's a guy on a machine that pulls a lever. When it's done, he throws it in the pile. Then he pulls the lever again on a new one. He throws it in the pile. Well, each one of those is slightly different.
Of course.
And so each one's going to have a different amount of deformation on that bullet in a different way. Some are more symmetrical, some are more asymmetrical. And so I think that plays a huge role in some of the noise they're seeing and some of the inconsistencies they have in bullet stability, because I've witnessed, hundreds of times in my own life, because we've been doing a lot of extreme long-range shooting for a long time just for fun. Sure. And professionally before that and other things like that. But even in the training, the RX 3000 class, I log everything. And so I ask them, all right, what's your twist rate? I note what bullets they're shooting, and then we shoot at a distance that's twice the range it should be stable at, right? Because when the bullet goes subsonic, from supersonic to subsonic, usually it tumbles and it hits the sonic barrier and it destabilizes.
Yeah.
Well, there's certain rifles that shoot way better through that zone.
Really?
And so then but you're not going to know those things unless you scientifically log them.
Yes.
And when I started logging them, I noticed like, hey, there's this, like the European way of chambering a rifle, particularly the Austrians and the Germans, the way they do it with the CIP specifications and the way they do it with the CNC machining, is very, very uniform. It's different than a reamer, like in the way they do it in the United States. And so when I see those rifles shoot, I see them like they're very consistently going way past the supersonic range. Yeah. They can go 3,000 yards and maintain their cone of fire the whole time.
Right.
Almost. And then even barrels that don't have enough twist rate according to the math equations, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm always, if you want to get into the technical aspect, I always love to question the methods and materials of any given study. That's hugely important. A lot of times guys look at pure review journal articles, for example, if you're a scientist, right? Like when I used to be a scientist one time, I had to go through the peer review process for my own papers, right? And also I had to do peer review on other people's papers. And like some people just think that going through the process means that it's good. That's not true.
Sure.
Who reviewed it? How critical were they? Did they actually read it? Did they actually have time to think about it?
Yeah.
Because what a good scientist will do is they'll be very, very hypercritical of the methods and materials. They're going to ask you every detail, like, all right, so, like, what about this? What about that? Could it have been this? Well, what if an ant walked on your, the front of your barrel? Like, what if this happened? What if there was a breeze down there? Like, there's, what are your, like, did you control the atmosphere? What if it was this? How exactly were you laying behind the rifle? Those are the things where you advance the science is by being critical of the methods and materials. And that's what we've incorporated into a lot of our training is because we exercise that every time we train. We just keep compounding this information, and then we apply that. And it's always a chart that's moving up and down. And we do little experiments with the drills to test things and see them, and then we log that. And it's interesting. But you're not going to see it if you're not paying attention. Yeah. And so there's these technical breakthroughs a lot of times are made by observations of very simple things. You don't need the most high-tech stuff to make an observation. For example, when we're at the 3,000-yard line, and because he can't see 3,000 yards through optics good enough, especially in small, we're shooting 7mm bullets and 30 caliber bullets at 3,000 yards. Yeah. Very effectively in my class. And that's way, way smaller than what most people use. Right. And then you have your guys who do bigger stuff, 338s and whatever. Sure. But you have to have a spotter down there. You have to have a forward observer, right? Right. Yeah. And so we got our FOs. The first year it was me and a couple buddies, and then the second year was some of the other guys that were experienced. But they're listening to the bullet coming in overhead. Right. And if the bullet's whistling in real silence, that means that it's going pretty aerodynamically straight through the air. It's maintained its tractability, which means that it's still point on with its arc of descent, which is usually like 40 degrees or something like that. Right. If the bullet sounds like a helicopter coming in, it's tumbling. Yeah. If the bullet's overhead, it's tumbling very quickly. Right. And so you can generally categorize these things if you ask, okay, which rifle was that? Okay, it was this rifle. All right, then you start to see patterns when you see that happen enough times. Right. And so that's how we're attempting to advance the science and come to a better understanding. But like I said before, the second a guy decides that you know everything, then you stop learning. So I decided a long time ago, and my father always was a big proponent of this way of thinking, is like the more you know, the more you start to realize that you don't know. Sure. So always pay attention to what's going on. And then always be ready to be corrected. Hold it out in the palm of your hand to be corrected by reality. Reality is truth. Yeah. Reality is king.
Yeah, your own personal experience.
That's kind of where I like to go with that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, it's very. It is astounding that after so many years and so many people doing it and so much effort put into the study of ballistics and warfare, that these things are still being discovered. But it just goes to show that there's always more to learn. So,
well, that's an interesting thing too. There's a lot of rediscovery of things they've known for 100 years too, because the science of long-range precision shooting and small arms is very new when you get to this level of precision. Like since the 90s, they've been really using like 50 calibers for extreme long-range interdiction. You know what I'm talking about, like the HTI stuff, or the 338 Lapua was in the 90s. That was the first. That's when they really started doing ELR type shooting, and they'd done it before that, of course. But if you look back at the naval gunnery manuals and the, field artillery from all these different countries, they have very, very good studies on a lot of these effects. And that's where that's where I do a lot of my research is I'll look at these old papers from 100 years ago or 50 years ago, and I'll look at them and be like, never thought of that, but that's exactly what's going on. And then I'll make a note of it, and then 5 years later, the industry will find out, and then they'll make some fix for it, Right. So it's interesting. Yeah, it's you always got to be open to look at old information, new information, and always respect your elders. So those that came before us, who knows, maybe they spent $10 million trying to figure out some subtlety of, internal ballistics that will save us a lot of money if we just pay attention to what they noted. And so that's why I like to dig through the books on that stuff too.
Well, of course, artillery was much more important, 60 years ago, even 100 years ago, certainly.
Sure. Artillery is the king of battle. That's like 75% of your casualties of war is, indirect fire munitions and bombs and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, that's a big deal. Plus, artillery is way more expensive.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the big reasons no one spent that much money on small arms is because just keep shooting, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
sure.
25 cents a round, just keep shooting. It's not a problem. An artillery round is like very expensive. So like, okay, we can't just burn through these things all day.
No,
and we can only, and they're heavy. You can only carry so many rounds. We're going to actually figure out the math. They hire a team of engineers and scientists to reverse engineer the mathematics. They come out with a drag model, which is just a model. It's not reality. It's just a model. Right. Come out with the drag model to come up with like the G1 or the G7 drag model, which were all based on small artillery pieces back in the day. Right. And they figured out the science and reverse engineered it. But there's a lot to be learned there for sure.
There's clearly a lot of secrets. I mean, that's a really, really interesting point that it's more likely stuff that we've forgotten than stuff we haven't yet discovered. There's the secret to good long range. So getting towards, I know I'm conscious I'm using up your time now. We're getting to the end of the hour, but I'm keen to know and to let our listeners know what is coming up for you in 2020. I know you've got there's an RX seminar in Australia that I'm aware of in March.
Correct. Yeah. We just went live with that on the website. So we're going to be going to Melbourne, Australia, for any of our friends down there. And we're hoping that's going to be a good time. I got some good friends from Australia, and so I've been invited down there repeatedly. I thought, heck, we'll just go down there, make it easy for them. Yeah. And so that'll be fun. That'll be an RX seminar. That's the classroom portion of the training, which is really the big download of information. Right. And so that's one of the big things we got going on next year. And of course, we have rexdefense.com is the website. Yeah. It has our training schedule on there. And we have a series. I think we have another combat command fire class, which is basically a different name. It's a field craft. It's a sniper class, like an old Sodic style sniper class. And we got we're going to start to book it up. We're in phase 2 of the operation in Rex Defense. The first 3 years, my business model was to kind of test it, see how it goes, do some traveling, get around a bit, meet some folks, get a couple ranges nailed down that we like to use, kind of explore the commercial market and see where it's at. Sure. And so now we've got a place in the Northeast United States that we like. I'm looking for a place in the Southwest, and then we're going to centralize the location here for this year, and then we're going to do a lot more where we're going to kind of pin her down. And I'm doing a lot more testing and evaluation work with other companies now too. That's taken up. I wish I had a cloning machine. Then it'd be more fun. I could do two things at once. So the future is always unclear. I play life by ear, and I try not to schedule out too far in advance because life changes so fast. You never know what's around the corner. Sure. And I don't like to commit. If I commit to something, I always follow through with that thing. Like I cannot not do it. Yeah. Even if I got pneumonia, I'm at my class. And suffering and whatever it is, but I'm still smiling because that's what I'm there to do. So
it did look pretty cold at your recent one in Texas.
Sure, yeah. Well, actually, it's funny. The last class we did in Texas, it was cold, and normally Texas is in the continental interior, at least in somewhat. There's the Gulf there, but it swings radically back and forth the temperature. Yeah, same thing up here where I'm from. In the summers up here, we'll get 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The winters can get 70 below Fahrenheit, negative 70 degrees. So it can really hot, really cold. Yep. Today I had to rush home today for the interview. One of my friends got a new Smith & Wesson AR-15, and we were getting that tuned in and kind of getting him a basic rifle management lesson. It's his first rifle. And so we're showing them how to operate in basic safety and stuff like that, and zeroed it, at 25 meters, like a battle sight zero. Yeah. And that another interesting point that I learned today, or that not that a guy learned so much, but just reiterated it, is there's so many different preferences that people, again, like I said at the beginning of the show, they'll superimpose equipment preferences on everybody, or like what kind of gloves you should wear, what kind of oil you should run in your gun, what works best, right? Yeah. And then you go out and it's like really cold. Yeah. All right, you don't feel your fingers now because you're wearing gloves. Yeah. with gloves over the top of those, and your fingers are numb because it's that cold, and you're holding onto this weapon that's cold, you don't feel the trigger. That's why the trigger is 8 pounds.
Right.
Guys like to put target triggers on those things. I don't like to put a target trigger on the battle rifles.
Sure.
And so, just kind of learning what it's like to do it in the field is so much different than what people imagine sometimes, when they're in a more comfortable environment. Most people don't like to go shooting when it's horrible out. I think it's a great opportunity to learn real life, And so, that's something that, or for example, a ballistic application like on the telephone, right? There's a lot of really good ballistic apps that are on your phone.
Sure.
And I always tell guys, this is something that I am dogmatic on, is when you come to a Rex Defense course, if it's one of our long-range courses, I'll tell guys you have to write down your ballistic data in at least its most basic form on paper and tape it to the weapon.
Right.
And people usually will follow what I say to do, but I have to say it 10 times.
Really?
Because there's always a couple of people that think they know better, and that's fine. And I smile, and I'm not, I get a kick out of it, and then I make the example for the next day. But the phone will freeze. The phone will have ice on it.
Really?
You can't use it with gloves on. There's so many things people don't think about when it's 70 degrees in your house playing with a ballistic app. When it's like freezing rain and a 30-mile-an-hour wind, then it doesn't work, or it gets wet, or the battery goes dead because it's like 30 below, or it won't feel your finger because your finger is frozen, and so it's kind of, or it'll just glitch, or you'll hit the wrong button and go to the wrong gun. And so I always tell people, use your technology, but write it down, a day ahead of time and tape it to your weapons so you have a backup.
That's good advice. There's definitely there's a lot of crutches out there to lean on, a lot of different tools, a lot of different technologies. I love technology. I think it's great, but you have to always go out there and wrestle with it in real life before you start to realize, okay, how is this to be employed in the field? And that's a big part of our training emphasis too, is like helping people manage that stuff, because we use all that technology stuff, lasers. But even with lasers, there are times when you can't use a laser for multiple reasons. Right. And so you have to understand the other methodologies. You have to understand stadiometric ranging. You have to understand basic trig, and it's just a 3-step equation. But like using your reticle to find out the distance to the target, you will have to do that if you're going to be shooting in non-perfect conditions. For sure.
And so that's something that we have fun with as well. And we, at our courses, we always have a lot of fun.
Great.
Adam, even when we fail, especially when we fail.
Yeah.
That's another big thing too. You were asking earlier if there was one thing I could tell people, besides always keeping an open mind, is like look at failure as the solid gold it is. Your failures are worth so much more than your successes. You don't learn anything when you hit the target. You just get more cocky.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, that was awesome. Oh, I hit it again. Oh, now I'm really good.
Yeah.
We had a young gentleman at one of our classes out east a few months ago, and it was raining out, and it was, I think, 1,100-yard target, and he was hitting it just one right after another. We had a certain drill with rules. You can only shoot one shot, and then you have to walk all the way back to the end of the parking lot, get your second cartridge, go back, and take another shot.
Right.
And so this kid started getting kind of, he was doing good. And so his successes were actually making him, feel too confident.
Yeah.
And so he started cheating on the drill. And so I said, hey, we have fun with it, but I make him do push-ups if I catch him cheating.
Yeah.
And I'll do push-ups with him. And, there's some kind of punishment of some kind, right?
Sure.
And we're always laughing and stuff. And we put the pressure on, and the kid's like, oh, no, I can hit it every time. I'm like, really? Are you sure about that? What about if I'm looking at you right now? Can you hit it right now while I'm looking at you? He gets so nervous and he just barely missed. Yeah, so we had a little gamble, and I said, hey, if you hit it, I won't make you do the push-ups. But if you miss, it's going to be horrible, and you don't even want to know what's going to happen. And so he shot, and he just barely missed the target, at 1,100. So we had a good laugh. But your failures are actually more gold, because if you have that open mind, like I talked about earlier, so you can go and explore, you got to find why you missed.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing with long-range shooting. There's so many guys that get comfortable with shooting and missing, and then just spinning the dial to where it hit, and then shooting. Yeah. That's just a really slow machine gunner, really. That's not like, that's not long range precision shooting. That's just kind of like cranking it in there, walking it in. It's a different deal. So
sure.
But it's all fun. I've done that before too.
Yeah.
When no one's looking.
Well, that's it.
I don't want to think today.
It's like in golf. If you're a golfer, you go to the driving range, and you get that new driver out. It's a giant club. You can barely swing it, and you duff a few shots. Yeah, I'll go back to the 7-iron. I was hitting that cleanly. I'll just do 50 balls of that. I'm sure it's easy to.
Yep, absolutely.
So I didn't know. I don't know. I've got two questions here. They're basically the same thing. You choose which one you'd like to answer. One is, if you could go back and meet 20-year-old Rex, what would you tell him? And the second question is, if not that, do you have any words that you like to live by, as sort of a credo? So I'll let you choose which one you prefer to answer there.
Sure. Both very profound questions. Those are good questions. I should say this. I'm going to copy you on my next podcast.
Sure, yeah. Be my guest, absolutely.
If I went a time machine and talked to myself at 20 years old, I'd just tell myself not to lose faith and to hang on. Sure. Life goes up and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down and it turns corners. Just kind of hang on. It's an amusement park ride that's crazy, and you have no idea where it's going. And don't get too glued to any one idea. You know what I mean? Because you don't know what's going to happen. And just be ready to roll with the punches. And then the life's credo, that's a good question.
That's a tough one.
I don't know.
Struggled with that.
I mean, it's hard to say in single words. I would say everything has to go through a certain filter, and I believe that filter has to be the filter of treating people better than you want to be treated. I think that's the golden rule in life. If you do that, you'll be blessed in multiple ways from multiple angles you never heard of before. You'll get all kinds of gifts that you wanted. Some of them you didn't want, but I think that's a huge thing. It's ancient knowledge. It's been taught before, but I think that's something that if I could only say one thing to like my son or like somebody that as I was passing away someday, theoretically, if I could tell them one thing, that's what I'd tell them, is like, treat people better than you want to be treated, and just hang on to that and hang on to love.
Fantastic, man. That's a great way to live, I think. Yeah, I completely agree with you there. So to wrap up, what's the best way for people to find you, man? How can they get on your courses, and where can they see your content?
Sure. www.rexdefense.com is the website for the training. There's a training by date tab there. And then, of course, the YouTube channel is where I put most of my stuff. It's Tiborosaurus Rex channel. You're not going to be able to spell it. Just look for Rex Reviews on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and it'll take you to my Tiborosaurus Rex channel. There's a million videos titled Rex Reviews.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I can't recommend that highly enough, actually, to everybody listening. There is so much content there. There's the Sniper 101, which alone will take you tens and hundreds of hours to get through.
I forget how it's almost. I think it's 80 or 90 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long
Actually,
series.
we have
packed.
secret plans that you can't tell anybody about. This is top secret plans.
Okay.
But I'm thinking on redoing that series to make it 100% timeless, so that it's because I had like the long hair back then.
Right.
And that's not in vogue anymore, right? So
it's
change
coming
that
back
up a little bit.
Yeah. All right, we'll keep that secret under our hats. Rex, this has been fantastic, man. Thank you so much for taking the time out. I think everyone's going to learn a huge amount just from this hour. And I highly recommend everyone check out the channel and get tuned in, because you've got a lot of really, really cool stuff to teach. So thank you again, man. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. No, it's always fun to visit with you guys, and you guys keep warm over there this winter, and maybe I'll run into you next time I cross over.
You've been listening to the Tier 1 Podcast. Brought to you by Tier 1, makers of the world's finest rifle accessories. Find out more at tier-1-usa.com. And tune in for more great insights on the next episode.